Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Demystifying Money. I am excited to be joined by Christy Bowie. She is the owner of Christy Bowie Financial Solutions, and she helps her clients when it comes to a lot of the CFO side of business, the taxes, structuring your business in a way that you can help make it profitable and enjoyable. So I'm excited to have her on to talk a little bit more about her business and how she helps her clients. Thank you so much, Christy, for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here and kind of talk about the ways that I help people and share this information.
Great. So, as a fellow money nerd, I love any time that I talk to another person that's gotten involved in helping other people with their finances. But tell me a little bit about what made you want to do this for a living and start to help others.
Yeah, so when I was in college, I started off really having no idea what I wanted to do. I said, "Oh, I'm going to take the pre-med track. Sure, that's going to be great." It did not work out for me at all. And I was shuffled around through different majors until I ended up in an accounting class. And I thought that it was so interesting to understand the basis of business. I kind of progressed in my career, got pushed into kind of this track of, okay, accounting is a really, reputable career. You'll have a job. And at that point, I was like, okay, great. I'll have a job out of school. I can pay off debt. I love it. And so I got the opportunity to stay in that program to do a master's degree to get my CPA. And at that point, I got to pick whether I was going to do tax or audit and kind of what direction I wanted to go. And at that point, I started getting really fascinated into the individual tax side and kind of learning how you can leverage tax to build your wealth, how you can use different rules, even in the same situation. I call it like the most efficient business. The lazy girl's way of getting rich really is just leveraging tax to keep more money in your pocket. And I thought that was incredibly interesting. And as my career progressed, I kind of had the opportunity to work at some of the biggest companies, to do tax returns of, multi-billion-dollar private equity firms. And as much as I love the exposure, I really wanted to work with individuals in a capacity that mattered to them. And so I eventually ended up starting my own firm so that I could work one-on-one with individuals. And I just love seeing the return of when I help a business owner build confidence in what they do and start to understand how this matters and how to structure their business and how to take home more money. That's really what has been so satisfying to me about being in this field.
That's great. And I think it's interesting because you mentioned, working corporate, or having that big, the exposure to bigger clients and that sort of, how is that tax, how is the work you were doing with the larger, how does it relate to people who are entrepreneurs or just starting out? Because I think a lot of times I'll talk to people that'll think about the big companies not, using the tax laws in their favor, but that's not what they consider, possible for the rest of us. And I do think that the laws are written the way they are. Maybe they're not perfect, maybe there's certain things that are problems, but they're written the way they are. So I believe that a lot of business owners could take advantage of actually understanding what's going on. But what do you see that's, pretty similar when it comes to what the big companies do and what entrepreneurs can do as well?
Yeah, so in terms of the rules and what, big companies versus entrepreneurs are able to use, it's all the same, just kind of on a different scale. And I think where I see entrepreneurs missing out a lot is the perception for entrepreneurs when they need an accountant or a CPA is, okay, I need someone to prepare my taxes. Well, if I get a client's information January the following year, I can't do anything about what already happened in the previous year. And so the real benefit that these companies are getting is an investment in a strategic accountant, a strategic partner who's going to help them plan and make these decisions before the year closes, while we can still change things. And so there's no difference as to what different people are able to do, but the investment that the company made in someone to help them proactively make the decisions is the difference between it being implemented in a tax year and it not being.
No, that's true because I think the corporations are always, there's probably a team of people that are constantly working on this where a lot of times you're right, business owners think, okay, it's tax season. Now I have to think about it. But, it's just like when I work with clients who are doing like retirement planning, when I'm working with them the day after they retire, there's still things that we can do. And I'm sure you find things that you can do with your clients, but also the earlier or the more of a strategy that's created, the more we can do period.
Right,
I think
exactly.
there's just a lot of times there's more options, or there's the things that you don't know what you don't know. And that's so true when it comes to taxes. But tell me a little bit more about the specific clients that you work with. I know you said you like to work with individuals. That's a pretty big group. So what type of individuals are really your, your sweet spot or your favorite group of people to work with?
Yeah, so right now I am getting really into working with influencers and content creators. I also take on, newer startup businesses, but really to me, the area of influencers and content creators was so appealing because there is just a lack of education out there about the taxability of these people and how they actually operate as a true business because it is such a new field, and especially the volume at which it's growing is starting to garner a lot of attention. And I think there will be a lot more tax guidance out in the next few years. Currently, there's just not a lot of tax guidance on things like this because, for things to get through the IRS, to get through the tax courts, to progress all the way through, it takes years and years. And so because influencing has just gained, the volume and traction it has, we haven't seen these cases go through the courts. We haven't seen advice on this. And so I'm loving the opportunity to kind of be at the forefront of what is this going to look like? How do we interpret these things and kind of help people, blaze the path for the future of this?
I think it's also good to have a more modern approach when it comes to this type of work, because I have worked with some clients that are influencers or that have gotten into that. And, sometimes they talk to their parents' accountant that think it's like their cute little thing that they're doing, or not exactly a real business. But and I mean, it is true. Sometimes the payments don't look like they would if you were in a 9 to 5 job and you're getting paid, here's your paycheck. I mean, they could be getting paid in travel, merchandise, all sorts of different things that from, if you're coming from a non-regulated industry, you might not even know if that's compensation or not. So I think it's really interesting to see that be a growing area for, financial consulting and tax law, because I mean, all you have to do is have one post that goes viral, and all of a sudden you might have hundreds of thousands of followers or something like that. And people are now asking you to promote their stuff. I mean,
Right.
so
And
when you
it's
talk to somebody, what do they like? What is that? What does that typically look like for them and their trajectory from being somebody who just is maybe likes something or posts something to actually a legitimate business?
Yeah, so I mean, it's so crazy because this is definitely an industry where I have to focus with clients a lot more on cash flow in their business versus just like income in terms of, they never know what's going to come in 1 month and what's going to go out. And so the approach I'm kind of taking with a lot of them reach out and it's literally like, Christy, I don't know what I don't know. Like they just, and there's not education out there. And so really, this starts with me working them through the basics of, hey, you are a business, like let's get you legally structured as a business. Let's get you an EIN so that when you are filling out forms for companies to gift you product or to send you 1099s, you're not giving out your social security number. All these little things that as a business owner, a conventional business owner, I'd rather say, you're taught that it's necessary to do. But as an influencer, that hasn't been approached yet. So really for me, kind of walking clients through actually setting up a true business entity and then understanding the impacts of whatever contracts you negotiate on your cash flow and your personal life, right? So just walking people through, hey, here's what you spend at home. How are we going to make sure you take that home from your brand deals and your partnerships and all of that? And then especially making sure, when you do get a big payout, how do we save and make that last, the I guess emergency fund really that these type of people need is so much different and higher really than the conventional advice that people are getting. And that's why I really think not only influencers, but business owners as well need very tailored advice to them because you aren't getting a paycheck every few weeks. And so really working with them to manage the cash flow and helping them understand that, hey, if you signed, this one-time sponsored post versus if you sign this ongoing partnership, how is that going to impact your finances differently? And if you accept a gifted product, but have to pay tax on that, what does that look like for you? And is it worth it?
Yeah, because it might not be worth it, right? In some situations, but it's true. If the company is giving product, they're going to be keeping track of it on the tax end for their company for sure. So I think if things don't match up, and
Yeah.
I think it's really important because it might feel like, oh, this is a nice gift, or oh, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And it's stuff maybe you don't even want to accept, but it
Yeah.
starts to, be part of the business. And I think that's really interesting to think about even disclaiming some of the stuff or trying to figure out the partnerships that you really want to do. Because like you said, it's different, especially from an emergency fund planning side, because if this is your sole source of income, it's very hard to, get unemployment if all of a sudden you don't have any more partnerships or you didn't, schedule things in a way that there was more recurring revenue. And so I think it's really important to have a strategy, at least when it comes to, you know, going into this line of work, which I think can be very lucrative. But
Right, absolutely. And just making sure you have different funnels that things are coming from in case one of those dries up, and understanding where to position yourself in the market that has been most advantageous financially for you, and understanding, how to sell those most advantageous services for you.
yeah. Are you working with any influencers that are, and I've seen more people be interested in being like a digital nomad or not having an exact location. How does that factor into their business when it comes to planning for their taxes or setting up, any sort of banking if they aren't really located anywhere anymore?
Yeah, so I mean, for tax purposes, you would still have a residency that is kind of your resident state. And basically your income would kind of be sourced there if that's where your business is. The thing that a lot of people like to say in those cases is, oh my gosh, like I'm traveling and working, it's all a write-off, it's all tax deduction. No, it's not. If you were just traveling, for the enjoyment of it and just happen to be working, it's not a write-off. And so I think a lot of people try to say, oh, this is all for business, my taxes are going to be really little. But in reality, your income is going to be sourced to your resident state, wherever that is. And you will be paying tax on your income and normal expenses, just as if you were to stay at home.
With expenses, they and for some of the people that, and I've talked to a few people in different at different points in my career that were influencers, whether they were established influencers and the company I was with was looking to partner with them, or they're people that I'm working with now that are getting into it. What do you notice about something I felt? I saw their expenses going up to kind of maintain this profile that they'd built. So when it comes to that, how much of that can be considered part of their business versus they're just, if they're not planning or have no strategy, kind of spending a lot of money to be at the certain places they need to be or wear what they need to wear, or have this professional appearance in photography and look. What kind of expenses are you coming across that people might be missing out on if they don't have a tax strategy?
Yeah, so this is the area that is just absolutely so vague right now because the IRS hasn't really come out and said, hey, for influencing, this is what we believe. I do see it coming in the next few years once these issues have time to make their way, up through the tax courts and kind of see what the result is. But as of right now, really the understanding that has come out of previous tax law is that ordinary necessary expenses, of course, are a deduction, but the big caveat is the IRS has kind of disclaimed personal expenses. So very particularly haircuts, things like that, anything that we're seeing as personal use or grooming or things like that are incredibly hard to prove that that's a legitimate business expense. And I think those are a lot of the things that influencers try to maintain an image of. And I had this discussion with multiple CPAs because there are many different ways to interpret it. But I have this conversation with CPAs all the time, kind of saying, well, where do we draw the line? Because I understand that you are creating a personal brand for yourself. And I can absolutely respect that and understand that's an ordinary and necessary expense in that respect. But if your entire life is your business, I would also like to maintain an image of professionalism, but I'm not writing off my haircuts and my nail appointments and things like that. So I think that a line has to be drawn because an influencer at the end of the day is a business. And if other businesses aren't able to do this, where's the line drawn? And so those are really kind of the gray area things I see. But also I see people missing out on basic things such as, travel, mileage for travel. If you go meet with a partner, or if you go even meet with a friend who is an influencer who you strategize with, maybe that meal or maybe that travel to go do that, there are some things that are a lot more legitimate business expenses than buying new clothes or getting a new haircut to maintain your lifestyle.
So interesting because I could see it if you were just justifying it. Like, I have to, get my eyelashes done or my hair blown out for these pictures that I'm posting because it's so important. But that might not exactly be what's happening on the tax end. However, the photography itself, maybe, or the trip to
Mm-hmm.
get there, or all of those things could be, a huge, savings if you were to actually, keep track of them. And even what I noticed some people might not be able to do is really separate the personal from the business, period. How important is it? And at what point, when people start to maybe get a contract, like how early should they be really thinking about keeping things, organized in a new way?
I would keep them separate from day one. From the minute you decide that you're going to start making this what it is, a business, you have an obligation to keep those separate, both for legal reasons, right? Especially if you are establishing an LLC. If you have an LLC, but you don't actually keep your bank accounts separate, that kind of breaks the LLC, right? If you aren't treating it as such. But also to understand your financials in your business. I always say your financial statements should tell a story. And if you can't understand that story because you can't see what is a true business expense, then you aren't understanding, hey, I'm spending way too much in this field, or hey, I'm accepting way too much income in gifted products. If you don't have financial statements to tell you that, you can't look at data to make informed decisions. And that's really what you need to be basing decisions off of as a business owner.
When people are approached, so say somebody now, me, I mean, I've posted a few pictures of like my dog, and I've had people like reach out and be like, hey, we'd love to have you. And I, most of the time I've ignored because it's not necessarily anything I want to do. But I actually even have friends who have their dogs are like micro, or they're actually legitimate influencers, and they're getting product and they're getting all these things. When someone approaches you, what are some of your thoughts that people should ask if they actually want to consider partnering or going into business with someone?
Yeah, so really some of the best advice I've kind of seen, and I do talk with, influencer managers on the more agency side as well, just to help understand because we're all involved in the process. Really things like how you can almost bundle is kind of what it's called, offers, right? Instead of doing one-off offers for, oh, I will do this one sponsored post here or, one here. It's all about predictability of your income as a business owner. And I think that's what most entrepreneurs are going to say is really a stressful point for them. It's not necessarily the income, it's the predictability of it. So whatever you can do to talk to that brand to create either a package or an ongoing program. Also make sure that you are either talking to a lawyer or some sort of agent or whoever you work with to understand the rights of the contracts. Big companies really try to throw things into their contracts, such as usage. They can use your image and likeness for advertisements. They can use it into perpetuity. These are all things that you should be compensated additionally for above and beyond what you are initially getting paid. And those are things that you need to kind of be looking out for in your contracts. And then at the end of the day, just making sure it's worth it to you. If you don't feel like you're getting compensated appropriately, you are going to burn out and you're not going to want to keep doing this. And so making sure that you feel you're being compensated appropriately for your time.
It's so important. And it's good that you mentioned that because I think a lot of times, and this is just people in general, like it's probably, flattering to be approached. And some people may be really, approached by legitimate companies that they can look out or that they can say, like, okay, this seems like this would be a great opportunity. But it's tough sometimes for a lot of people to have some boundaries and to say no. So I think all of those things that you mentioned are so important about really reviewing the contract, talking about really negotiating for yourself, like an agent would, to say like, what if we were to do this many? Because it is true that some of the, even the standard contracts, if they're just given to you, they tend to favor the person who's presented it. And
Yeah,
I remember looking at a contract once where it was, your image and likeness, and basically for any, without any, you know, real tailoring it to the project or to what we were working on. And so that could put your name and your face attached to things that you don't even know about, you're not even
right.
working on, which is something that if you're building a brand, be very careful about, how things are used and managed. So I
And
certainly
for
do think it.
anybody struggling with this, like that was something that I was like, oh my gosh, it's so hard, when brands approach me even to charge more. But I would advise you to say, you are setting the standard for the industry. So if you are going to let people walk all over you and not pay you what you're worth, that's kind of the standard for the industry. So by you raising your standards, you're raising the standards for everyone in this industry. And so if you are the outlier who is bringing it down for everybody else, that's, you don't want to be doing that. You have a responsibility to, your peers really in this career as well, to make sure that you are requesting adequate compensation.
I think that's a great way to look at it, because a lot of times nobody knows, or maybe it's like, I mean, people in general don't tend to talk about their salary or what they're making. And now there's a little bit more information, like if someone was to go to a website like a pay scale or Indeed or Fairy Godboss or something, to kind of see what people make in a traditional role at X company. For influencers, I don't even know if there's anything like that, to have a temperature check or any sort of gauge on what is reasonable or fair. And so I do think talking to someone like, or doing your homework, or actually, if you just know what you need,
Yeah.
period,
That's
to
a huge
make.
thing. Just understanding both kind of what you need personally, because is it going to be worth it for you to achieve the personal goals you have? And then also another thing I do is kind of look at financials like a typical business. Okay, you did this project, it took you X hours, you were getting paid X much an hour. Did you feel like that was worth it? And if the answer was no, you're not going to do another project at the same rate, right? It's so similar to how a business would evaluate getting paid by the hour.
What I noticed is that I find this in so many situations where I'll ask people, what they'd like to make or what they need to make, and they just go back to what they made before. They will say, well, this person paid me, or this company paid me $50,000. So I guess I'd like to make that again. And I'll ask, do you need that? And they might need 60,000 or 70 or more, but they anchor at that number that was arbitrary and has nothing to do with what they'll be doing in this new role. And they just kind of get stuck there. So what you're saying about actually asking some questions about how something went, if you felt like you were compensated fairly, was it worth your time or your energy? And if they actually have to think about it that way, they might not anchor to that price anymore, because most of the time they'll just think, I guess that's what I'm worth. And it's
Right. No,
so
you
random.
decide. Yeah,
Yeah.
you decide what you're worth and you can tell people you are worth that or not. In fact, that's the exact things that I've done in my corporate jobs. I've left 2 corporate jobs and both of them I said, look, I've decided I'm worth more and I'm moving on to do that for myself. The same situation for anybody who is self-employed.
Yeah. And it's just a matter of kind of really doing a lot of reflection and review of what's going on, which is usually helpful with somebody else. Because in our own heads, we'll
Yes.
just be like, I'll just, we're trying to find shortcuts. We'll do what's easier or what's familiar. And so when someone else is asking you, okay, let's talk about this story. How would we explain this, or explain your compensation? And if you're still struggling, but you're working so hard, it's not going to feel good. However, you might not know how to change things. You might just think, okay, if I work harder or work more, things will immediately get better, which it doesn't seem to be always the case, especially when your goals aren't exactly lined up with the compensation. I'm curious though, your thoughts about when entrepreneurs should look out for somebody, whether it's a financial planner like me on the personal side, or somebody like you that's actually looking at the business finances. Do people, I feel like some people are starting to reach out quicker and younger, which is fantastic. But What are some of the key things that an entrepreneur might want to think about in their business that they might need some more help?
Yeah, so I would say, first off, if you are stressing about it, there is no point in losing sleep over this. You created your business to have the life that you want. So why are you spending, nights awake stressing? Am I making money? How much to pay myself? I have clients come in all the time who ask me those questions and just say, I quite frankly don't know what I don't know. So if you're feeling like that, if you are feeling like you're in a place where you want to grow your business, there is such a catch-22 with growing businesses in terms of, well, I have to do this to be at the next step, but I also have to be at the next step to be able to afford this. So things like that, when you are getting ready to grow, it's such a good idea to kind of talk with a professional. Okay, how are we going to fund that growth? What are we going to strategize on? Which areas are we going to grow? And that's something that I turn to financial statements. And so if you don't have, a year or two of financial statements before that, how am I going to get data out of that information? How are we going to make informed decisions? So I would say, if you have a growth vision for your business, start as soon as you can. And it doesn't have to be, hiring someone like me. It can be setting up QuickBooks, going on YouTube, saying, hey, how do I do QuickBooks? Or even keeping a spreadsheet, but just making sure that you are keeping track of this data as early as possible to use it to make informed decisions. And really, the big struggle that I think a lot of people have is the first person they reach out to is someone in marketing, someone in advertising to help grow their top line. But the money that comes in is not what you take home. And that's my biggest warning to people. Just increasing your income doesn't do anything for you if you're not strategizing on how to take more of it home.
I agree. And I agree on the growth part too. I think that a lot of people think like, okay, I need to invest in either, marketing, paid advertisement, all of that. But I think you're right. If you don't understand the bottom line and the numbers, then it's really hard to make a sound investment. I think that could be, and they could happen kind of along the same track, but a lot of times we just think like, okay, no, it's going to be this, or this course will do it, or this thing will do it. And I think having a really clear picture of where you are financially is just so, I don't know. Like I've compared it to self-care for people because I feel like when you are confused or you're lost or you're looking for the solution somewhere else outside of what's going on with you right now, it's very hard to find. Because there's a lot of people that are offering like the next best funnel and the growth and all of this. But I think if you know actually where you stand, even if it's not exactly where you want to be, it's better to feel like you're in control of these decisions and understand like this is what I expect to have and this is what I'd like to see next year, instead of just wanting everything to happen all at once, because sometimes things can progress quickly once you've got everything in alignment. I think then you feel like, okay, now I can hire somebody or grow, or even if it's not hiring a full-time person, maybe getting, a couple of people to help me in these areas that I know I don't like, but are contributing to the bottom line financially. So I think that's so important. And I'm curious, you said you were in a couple corporate jobs. When you started your business, and I know that I've gone from corporate too, where I had a very strong idea about how much money I needed to actually have a runway that wasn't too long that I felt like I was in early retirement, or long enough that I didn't have to worry about just going to get another job to make things happen. How did you figure that out for yourself? And what tips do you have for people that maybe are starting to feel like, okay, do I make this a full-time thing and jump in head first? Or do I need a little bit more time or savings or strategy before I become a full-time self-employed person?
Yeah, so I have a really interesting story. And whenever I tell people this, they're like, Christy, you're insane. My husband is actually in grad school right now. So I am the sole earner and I quit my job to start my own business. So really, I was betting on myself in so many ways, knowing I had to support both of us. And so, I got myself to a runway of, in fact, we were saving up for a house, fell through, couldn't be more thankful because I'm sitting on a down payment. And I said, you know what? This is, 8 to 10 months of living expenses. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to run and I'm going to bet on myself. And that's kind of when I started to feel comfortable, because I said, you know what? I have marketable skills. I have, degrees that people are interested in. If this starts to fail, and I don't even like thinking it, but the logical side of me, if this starts to fail, I'm giving myself 6 months. And then I still have 4 or 5 months after that to find a job and keep myself afloat. And that was like the bare minimum. Like, this isn't my savings account. I have other things I could have tapped into that I obviously didn't want to. But giving myself that runway. And also, I quit my job. I actually did not mean to quit that day, but I knew it was coming. And I was at a point where I was like, I don't feel good about the position I'm in. I am going to burn out before I even get to start my own business. And so, knowing where my mental capacity was and knowing that I couldn't keep going on the place I was, trying to start my business, actually have another business, working full time, I was working myself to the ground. And so I was at the point where I was like, something has to change. I have the savings. I also had not clients lined up, but I had been throwing this idea in people's ear for a really long time. It was like, hey, one day I'm going to start my own firm, like, just be ready. And so that's something I would always, advise people, especially if you're starting a more conventional business, like I did. Just throwing that idea in people's minds, doing your market research, seeing what's available, and getting confident with the fact that your services are in demand. And then knowing you have a long runway to get that off the ground.
I think it's funny how many people don't talk about what they want to do in business because I think they're afraid of what they're going to hear. But I agree, before I left corporate, before I did a lot of different things, I was kind of mentioning or talking about it to people just to see if I even had an audience or even one person who might pay me for what I was thinking about doing. Because I remember people saying for a long time, even when I was in, starting to study for the CFP in 2011, they were like, no one is just going to pay for financial advice. People, it's just going to be investment management. That's what you're going to switch to. And I do both. But I remember thinking, no, I think people will pay for advice that is, really just not judgmental, not really with no other influences at all. I think people will want that. And so I was kind of asking people, like, if you could pay somebody to help you with these decisions, would you do it? Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. Or even before I got a life coach certification, it was like, do you think you'd want to talk to somebody about some of the mindset issues around money or some of these things that actually are keeping you small or keeping you from, doing the things you want to do? And, a lot of people in my field were like, why would you get that certification? That makes no sense. But I would talk to people about it and they'd be like, yeah, of course, that would be, I feel uncomfortable talking to my advisor, which is worse. Right. And so I think it's interesting that you kind of were getting, throwing out some ideas and you at least knew, because that's what, it's unfortunate when people are like, okay, I've decided, I jumped in, and they don't know if they have a viable product yet or a marketable business. And so then it's like, okay, I need to buy the funnel. I need to buy this. I need to buy X. And it becomes a very expensive hobby before it's really a business. And having a big savings account doesn't hurt. Right. I mean, it's not like you need to know basically how much it costs to be you for 1 month, period. And a lot of people don't know that. Right. And then you say, okay, if I can give myself 6 months or 8 months, that is a bigger emergency fund than most people who have 2 dual incomes, get paid every Friday, need. But I think it's smart because you're right. You could have gotten another job before. I was ready to leave a job by my thought in my head would be by June. And I remember I left in December. I was ready to go, but then I was working on some things that I didn't mind. And the pressure was off because I knew I could do it when I felt like it. And so I think that's really important to just kind of know in the back of your mind, like what your plan is. And maybe it'll happen quicker. Maybe it'll happen a little bit slower, but certainly doesn't hurt to know that you can survive.
Well, I also think from a true business strategy perspective, knowing you have that savings to not have to accept the first client who comes to you and to actually get to be picky about who you work with. And I'm pretty picky about, hey, this is or this isn't a good fit, because I know that I want to serve the clients who I absolutely match with and who it barely feels like work and who genuinely appreciate what I'm doing, because that's how I'm going to keep loving what I'm doing and feeling passionate about it. And so from a strategy perspective, if you feel pressured to take on every opportunity that comes to you and you start burning yourself out just because you need to churn money left and right, from a business perspective, that's just not very good.
No, it's not. And I think that I've noticed that too when some people would, cringe when their phone rang. I never want to feel that way when my clients call. And
No.
if I do, I'm not the right fit for them, and I'm not the right person for them, and they're not right for me. And so it's nice that I can still run a business successfully and really enjoy all my clients and want to work so hard for them, because I don't just work with anybody because I don't feel like I have to. And I think you're right about that being something that might happen with a newer business owner if you're not exactly sure how much income you need or how many clients you need or what you need each client to pay, that you might just say yes to everybody and then be trying not just to get new clients but to unload the ones you have that you don't want, which can be really, really
Yes.
exhausting. And honestly, it doesn't really benefit anybody. But a lot of times those are the people that pay you the least because you didn't know what you were really, valued at. And then when you start to learn, it's like, oh my goodness.
Darn.
So pricing and all of that, all of those things that people struggle with can be, it's definitely helpful to work with somebody on that. And if you're an influencer and you are getting paid in very different irregular ways, you still can plan. You still can have a financial plan. You can still have a tax plan. You can still have a business plan. It's just going to look different than a template that you find online. So all of this is so important. I'm curious, what do you have going on next, or how can people reach out to you if they want to follow you and learn more, or even just reach out to you for a consultation?
Yeah, so my website is christybowie.com. And on the website, I'll have all the ways that you can work with me. I'm also working on something super exciting for those of you who are more DIYers. You don't just want someone to tell you what to do, you want to learn how this works in your business, and you want to actually have that knowledge going forward. So I'm starting a group coaching program that's going to start in the next few months. So all of that, the wait list for that is all linked on my website, and then all of the ways that we can work together. I'm also at It's Christy Bowie on all social forums, TikTok, Instagram, all of it. Feel free to reach out to me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christy. And if you're looking to see if you have the capacity in your own personal financial plan to consider some of these exciting business opportunities that Christy's talking about, please feel free to head over to mistylynch.com. We have some resources there where you can either do some creative, review of your own money mindset and finances, or really start to get a financial plan together for yourself. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.